Hey, welcome back to Passmore Books. I'm Brittany Passmore, and I'm excited to talk to you guys more about some books today. So today I wanted to talk about all the books that I read in September. So let's get started. The first book that I read in September was The Name of the Wind. I don't have a copy with me. I borrowed it from the library and already had to return it. I also didn't start this book in September. I started it back in August, but finished it in September. If you don't know what The Name of the Wind is, it's a pretty popular fantasy book by Patrick Rothfuss. I think it's pretty well known in most fantasy circles. From what I know, Patrick Rothfuss has been struggling to write the third book in this series for a long time. But basically, it's a fantasy book about... how do I even explain this? It's about a mysterious innkeeper who is not actually an innkeeper. He's really this guy who's famous and kind of a legend in this world. I don't know, he has kind of a good and bad reputation to him, I guess. He's just legendary for his skill in magic and fighting and intelligence, all sorts of things. So the story starts with this innkeeper just taking care of his inn. You learn pretty quickly that the roads are bad. Right now, there's weird things going on, like monsters popping up that people think are demons and crazy things like that going on. And you're quickly realizing that this innkeeper, there has much more to him than he's letting on to other people. And eventually, this traveler comes to his inn who is a chronicler, is what he's called. So he basically records stories and rumors and things, and he asks the innkeeper to tell his story because he realizes who he actually is, and asks him to tell his story so he can get the truth written down somewhere, because there's so many rumors and myths and legends about this guy. And so he says, okay, I will give you 3 days and I'll tell you my story in those 3 days. So the first book is the first day of him telling his story about how he became the legend he is. And it mostly focuses on his childhood into his teenage years, focusing on the things he learned, and especially getting an education at a university that is all about alchemy and math and medicine and magic. I didn't know any of this going into this book. I just knew it was a popular fantasy book that lots of people love. And the structure of the book threw me off at first, because I went the first 8 to 9 chapters thinking, oh, cool. I'm interested in what's going on in this mysterious little town and what the innkeeper is going to do about it all. And then it suddenly turned into, oh, let me tell you the story of my life. Which is fine, it was a good story too, and I loved getting to know Kvot's character. I liked following him. I liked the side characters that were brought in. The bits of adventure were interesting. The bits of the schooling and magic were interesting. There was lots of good stuff in the story. I think I actually almost cried at one point because I was invested in this kid and his childhood. But I was so disappointed that I wasn't getting what I thought the original setup of the story was. And I just kept wondering the whole time, so am I going to get answers to what's really going on right now in the present time while he's telling the story? Or is this... And I just wasn't sure if this first book was going to be the first day of him telling the story, or if we were going to cover 3 days in this first book and then move on to other stuff. And so I spent a lot of the book being very unsure about how it was going to turn out. And then the ending did disappoint me. I was worried about it the whole time, and I was so hopeful that it would somehow turn into something what I expected, what I hoped for. I really wanted to have a satisfying conclusion to the story that Kvothe was telling, but I also wanted just more about what was going on in the real time. And we did get an exciting thing happening in real time, right? But I felt the actual story that Kvothe was telling had no ending at all. He was yeah, and eventually this happened, but that's a story for another day. So let's move on to other stuff tomorrow. And it was just like so, I felt like everything had been building up to what he just brushed off as something to tell another day. So I was really disappointed by the ending. It fell flat for me. I just wanted so much more out of it. But I did enjoy like the rest of the story overall, like as a whole, especially once I got used to the idea, made peace with the idea that it was a different story than I'd been led to believe in the first few chapters. So I don't plan to read the second book anytime soon. I think I will eventually someday. My plan is that if Patrick Rothfuss ever gets around to finishing that series, then I'll probably remind myself of what happened in the first book, try the second book and see how it goes, and then we'll go from there. But as for now, it was like a pretty good book that I enjoyed well enough, but the ending did not work for me, and I'm not worried about moving on to the second book anytime soon. So, glad I read it, had a fun time, but I don't know that I'd recommend it to anybody very strongly, especially because I know that the author might not write the last book anytime soon. So, the next book that I read in September is a book that I actually read along with my husband, Calvin. He's taking a literary class in school right now, and I kind of convinced him to take it. So he has to read a bunch of books throughout the semester, and his class is all about like perspectives in literature and talking about how places have influenced the writing, or how the writing's been influenced by like certain places, things like that. And so the professor, because we live in Utah, he's actually trying to pull a lot of books like from Utah, or like that have been set in Utah or influenced by Utah or things like that. So the first book that they were supposed to read that I read with my husband is A Study in Scarlet, the first Sherlock Holmes book. And I know I've read at least one Sherlock Holmes book before, but for some reason I just hadn't read more than that, and I never read A Study in Scarlet. So I was like, oh, hey, this is a good opportunity. I should read more Sherlock Holmes. Like, I love the different shows and movies made about Sherlock, and just think it's so fun. So I wanted to read it with him, and I was really surprised. I didn't really know anything about it going in, and then Calvin found out while I was just starting the book that half of the book actually takes place in Utah, and I was like, what? Like, really? I couldn't believe that this like famous literary author would like set part of his book in Utah. But it turns out the villains of the book are the cult Mormons. It's a very poor portrayal of Mormonism in Utah, and really portrays members of the church as a cult. The first half of the book is all about Sherlock and Watson figuring out the puzzle. It's actually Watson meets Sherlock for the first time. They're figuring out this crazy mystery, trying to figure out how some people were killed. The second half of the book is like the backstory of the people in Utah and what led somebody to seek revenge after some Mormons and all these things. Really paints Mormons in a bad light. So I enjoyed reading it. Part of me couldn't help like laughing like during the second half of the book, because just the way that my religion was portrayed, because I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and the way it was portrayed, it was just so false. Like, almost nothing was accurate at all. It was almost hilarious how off it was. And I just thought it was kind of funny that like, here's this like well-known book, and my religion is just being like portrayed as something completely not at all like what it is. So it was really interesting to realize that this book was part of the foundation of the way that a lot of the world viewed my religion for a long time. And so it was interesting to see like where a lot of those roots kind of came from. Calvin mentioned to me that he found out that apparently later in his life, Arthur Conan Doyle went and visited Salt Lake City and, met people from the church and got to know the people and culture a little bit better, and realized that what he wrote was not at all accurate to what the church is like and what the people are like. There are, of course, extremists in like every religion and community, right? But like overall, it was not an accurate depiction. Apparently he like felt pretty bad about the way that he had portrayed the church. I don't know if he ever did anything about it or tried to write any essays or like things to like try to take back some of what he said or anything, but it made me feel good to know that he felt bad for portraying us that way. But it was a fun read, and it definitely made me think about how important this own voices movement is that's coming around in publishing and writing lately. A lot of people are so hungry for authentic portrayals of different characters and lifestyles and cultures, right? Like if you have a character who's African American, you want to know like the African American experience. Or if you have a book about somebody who's Jewish, right? Like anything like that, like people want to see the authenticity and know like the true experience, and they want things to be genuine. So it kind of solidified to me how important this is, because I definitely would have wanted this book to be more true to what my church was like. And it's a little bit hurtful to know that so many people saw that presentation and probably got all the wrong ideas from it. I'm not like blaming Arthur Conan Doyle for like writing a poor representation of my religion, probably because I'm pretty sure he was just really misinformed and had just heard about my church being a cult and had misinformation and thought that he was writing a real thing. And it sounds like he learned his lesson later, but it's still something that could potentially mislead people later, right? Because it's a popular series, the Sherlock Holmes series, right? Anyway, it's a fun read if you're really wanting to get more into like the Sherlock Holmes books and like want to see where it all started. But just remember that about half of the book is very much fiction and is not real. So along with the Sherlock Holmes book, A Study in Scarlet, Calvin and I also, we started reading The Riders of the Purple Sage. That was another book that was assigned to him. And I think I read 1 or 2 chapters and put it down, and Calvin didn't even technically finish it all either. He read more of it than I did. So The Riders of the Purple Sage is a Western. I didn't know anything about the book when I started it, except that it probably had something to do with Utah. And it made it very clear very early on that the Mormons were the bad guys yet again, the cult. And there's this like woman who's a Mormon, and she's like so innocent and like blinded by her beliefs. And there's this like rough kind of cowboy hero who comes in and is trying to stop the Mormon cultists from killing the Gentiles. And you can tell that like there's some attraction between him and the girl, and like but of course she shouldn't be attracted to him. I don't know, it's all sorts of crazy, and again like very, very derogative towards the church. So I put it down, didn't finish it, don't regret it. I have no desire to pick that book up again. I don't really like Westerns anyway, but to have one that's like actively like degrading what I believe in and making a terrible picture, a terribly unrealistic picture of what the people of my church were like in the past, I don't need that in my life. A book that I did read is a book that I read with a book club, actually. I just got together with a bunch of friends in my area, and we decided to start a book club together because we all love reading and talking about books. And the first book actually that we've decided to read together is a book called Educated. It's by Tara Westover, and it's a memoir about Tara growing up in Idaho and living a very sheltered life. She grew up actually as a member of my church, but ironically enough, after all that I just said about A Study in Scarlet and all these other things, her parents actually were a little bit more extreme in their practice of our religion. And you could kind of call the way that her family worshipped like cult-like. For instance, the father was very against public school. He was afraid of all these like socialist ideas being ingrained in his kids, and so he like didn't let his kids go to school. Half his kids didn't even have birth certificates. The parents like don't want their kids going to any hospitals. Lots of things that are pretty extreme. And Tara grows up just as a little girl on this kind of isolated, kind of almost farm in Idaho, just thinking that this is all totally normal and that it's even preferable. She thinks that she is living righteously and that she's more righteous and that she is staying away from all the frivolous things of the world, and that she's keeping her mind pure and not getting brainwashed with ideas of men or things like that. But eventually Tara actually decides to go to college, and she studies on her own, and she works really, really hard and manages to pass the ACT so that she can go to BYU. And it's a big shock to her. The memoir is about her getting to BYU, her experiences there, and the crazy way that her perspective of the world changed as she learned more, and her journey into being educated, and also how that caused a lot of difficulty with her family, and how she had to essentially try to figure out how to balance, you know, the love she has for her family and the good that is there, but also the good and the freedom that she knows comes from her education. It was really good. I really enjoyed it. Right away, I was just blown away by how amazing the writing itself was. Tara has this incredible way with words, and it's just beautiful. Her description, especially whenever she would describe her home in Idaho, it was beautiful, and she just personified like the little peak that she lived on so beautifully. And wow, and she had so many just like profound thoughts all along the way. It was really incredible in those first few chapters, just realizing the kind of childhood she had and seeing some of the things that she went through and some of the things that she was taught and some things that she just thought was normal. But like having that told to me in the voice of somebody who is so articulate, who is so well versed in language and literature, it was an interesting juxtaposition in the beginning to realize that like she's changed so much throughout her life. It was a really powerful story about her growing up and learning, and especially learning to change some of her ideas about the world. It made me think a lot about who I want to be as a parent, how I want to raise my children, and how I want to teach them to learn and to explore and ask questions, and not like trap them in my own ideologies, even if I think that they're right. You may want to know, if you're interested in picking up Educated, which I would recommend. It was an excellent read. There's a little bit of abuse involved in her story. Not like a little bit, like there's quite a bit of abuse in a couple different forms in her story. And if you don't want to deal with mental or physical abuse at all in a book, then consider not reading it. The last book I read in September was actually a reread, and I actually have a physical copy to show you. It was Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson. All the other books I was reading, they were like on my phone or from the library, and like, so I don't have actual copies of them. But Warbreaker, I was able to hold and turn each page. It was so fun. Oh, I've been wanting to reread this book for a long time now. I don't know why, I was just in the mood to reread it. I first read it probably when I was in high school, like my senior year, probably. Maybe my freshman year of college. But either way, that was probably back around 2014, and it's 2021 now, so like it's been a while since I read it. And it was so fun. I loved just remembering the story and the characters, remembering just the intricacy of the magic system and the cultures. There's so much that Brandon Sanderson does so well in his books. So if you don't know anything about what Warbreaker is, it's a fantasy novel where one country, Hallandren, has a god king. And there's a neighboring little country that is kind of like seen as the rebel faction. And they basically agreed to let one of their princesses marry the god king. And so the king sends one of his daughters to go wed the god king and give him an heir to kind of try to keep the peace. So the older sister, Vivenna, is feeling like, what am I doing now? Like, am I just supposed to sit here and let this happen? And our younger sister, Ciri, is like, oh, I am not prepared for this. So those two sisters are two of the main characters who we follow. We also follow one of the gods of Hallandren. There's the god king. There's also a bunch of gods around him. And these gods, they are like people who have died and then who have somehow been like kind of resurrected, and they've been given like a divine breath. That breath is involved in the magic system. And these gods have this one really powerful divine breath that allowed them to return to life. And they're basically there, as their religion says, to do some great thing that they learned about in the afterlife, but they've forgotten their whole previous life. And anyway, so these gods are basically lounging around in luxury, supposedly waiting around to do one great deed. So we're following one of these gods, Lightsong, and he actually doesn't believe that he's a god. He spends a lot of time kind of making fun of himself and making fun of others. He's really entertaining to follow. We also follow Vasher. He is a mysterious character who we can tell is a really good at the magic system, and he has his sword Nightblood. If you know, you know. A very funny but dangerous sword who, and I say funny because the sword can talk. And he's in this kingdom, Hollendrin, trying to stop a war from breaking out, basically. So we're following all these characters as they're trying to avoid war, figure out all these secrets going on in the kingdom. And I think overall it's very exciting. I was really, really interested to see how I would like this book, since I'd already read it and knew everything that was coming. In some ways, I think that made me enjoy some things more, and in some ways, I think it made me enjoy some things a little bit less. I remember reading the prologue and feeling like, oh, Sanderson is so good at showing us how his magic systems work in an exciting way that's not boring or like just explaining to us all the rules. The prologue was just so exciting and fun. Watching Vasher like break out of jail and his character being established like right away so well. It was so fun. I don't remember having that many criticisms of this book when I first read it, but now I'm a little bit more experienced in understanding story structure and character development because I'm an editor, right? And so I realized that there were a few things that felt just a little bit off to me about certain characters. I just remember Blushweaver. She's one of the gods as well. I guess I kind of wish that had been set up a little bit differently. I wanted to want to trust her, and I didn't want to trust her, like, at all. One of the things that surprised me was that there were a couple places where I actually did feel like there was a bit of an info dump. Like when someone told the story of, like, the beginning of the God Kings. That felt like a really, like, what went over my head, stuff I didn't necessarily need to know. And I'm normally not like that with this kind of lore, and I think part of the reason might be because I think I remember being more tired when I was reading that part than like some of the other parts. So, and I think there was another part that, again, stuff was kind of like going over my head a little bit, and I was having a harder time like grasping everything. But I think, again, like I was really tired when I read those two parts. So maybe there was a little bit of info dumping, or maybe I was just tired. I don't know. Overall, I really did enjoy rereading Warbreaker. My favorite part of this book is Ciri and her relationship with the God King and seeing that evolve. And I think that made me want more this time than the first time, because I already knew everything that was coming. And so part of me was like, yes, but also like, I need more development to this too. But I was pleasantly surprised by how much I really enjoyed following Vasher, and some of Vivenna too. I remember like Ciri was really my favorite part of the book before, so she was mostly what I remembered. So her parts of the story were what I remembered best when I came back to reread this. I had forgotten almost everything about Vasher and what he did. And so it was really fun to follow him and see what he was doing. I really enjoyed him. I really, really enjoyed seeing Vivenna's character arc and seeing her really change her perspective, really similar to Tara in Educated. She really learned that a lot of things that she'd been taught and a lot of things that she believed weren't necessarily correct, or at least weren't necessarily correct in every instance or to the extent that she believed, or things like that. And Vivenna really changed a lot and really became a new person by the end of the book. And it was really cool to see her embracing new ideas and deciding to become somebody different because of what she experienced and what she learned. And that was really, really cool. Overall, I'm so glad I reread it. I had so much fun. So those are all the books that I read in September. If you've read any of these books, I'd love to know your thoughts. Let me know if you want to read any of them. And if you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. And I'd love to hear any of the other books that you read in September. Thanks for watching. I'm gonna go read some more books, and we'll see you guys next time. Bye!